are attempting there. Now we're recording.
Okay, good.
Also, Falmouth Community Television is recording. Uh, Massachusetts is a two-party state. It's an anti-wiretapping statute, and now you're all informed, and the icon should tell people that we're recording. But if you don't want to be recorded, you may leave now.
Or just turn off your video.
Yeah, or your audio.
Yep.
It's actually an audio statute.
Okay. All right, so let's get started. As if you didn't hear from the conversation before the meeting began, I'm Linda Collins. I'm the director of the Falmouth Public Library, and we're happy to provide a forum for community conversations. So tonight we'll have a progress report on FalmouthNet. FalmouthNet is a nonprofit project to build a community-controlled fiber optic network as a competitive alternative to current options. Falmouth residents Dan Gessen and David Isenberg are here to report on their progress towards the FalmouthNet initiative. So I'm going to turn this over to David or Dan.
Oh, okay. Hello, everybody. I'm David Isenberg, and I'm on the board of FalmouthNet, Inc. And we'd like to thank you, Linda. We'd like to thank the Falmouth Library for hosting this event. And we'd like to thank all the Falmouth citizens who are here on Zoom and out there in TV land on FCTV for being here. This is actually the third community networking meeting hosted by the Falmouth Public Library. At the first library meeting in June of 2019, we were just an informal citizens committee presenting an idea about a community network in Falmouth. And we thought that if we did a feasibility study, we would actually be able to determine whether the network that we were thinking about was a feasible option for our town. This meeting got us invited to the very next meeting of Falmouth's EDIC, where the EDIC voted unanimously to fund and administer the feasibility study that we had proposed. The second library meeting was in December of 2019, where we introduced Doug Dawson, who's here today, who is actually going to be the main speaker of this event. Doug Dawson was a national expert that we, in collaboration with the EDIC, chose after a detailed public RFP process where we put out an RFP and evaluated a lot of responses. And Doug was the winner of that process. Then the COVID pandemic hit, but Doug Dawson persevered, kept working on our study, and delivered the study to us last November of 20. The feasibility study was an excellent realization of EDIC's mission to expand Falmouth's economic activities and opportunities. It provided a springboard for the Citizens Committee that thought up this network idea to incorporate as FalmouthNet, to become a 501c3, and to recruit a world-class advisory board of community networking experts. It provided a platform for FalmouthNet to establish working relationships with our government representatives at the town, county, state, and federal levels. It provided the momentum for FalmouthNet to talk to over a dozen community groups to get their input and their buy-in. It provided standing for FalmouthNet to have working discussions with 8 established firms capable of planning, building, and operating the network that we envision for Falmouth. It provided a basis for talks between FalmouthNet and OpenCape about the shape and scope of a potential partnership. and it established FalmouthNet it established Falmouth, the town of Falmouth, as a leader in community networking in more than a dozen southeastern Massachusetts towns where we've had talks with town officials and citizen activists. FalmouthNet did all this thanks to the momentum that the feasibility study provided, which the EDIC wisely saw fit to fund and administer, and which Doug Dawson executed beautifully. The $52,000 investment in this study has, to my mind, already returned more value than it cost. And FalmouthNet is just getting started. We are going to build this thing for Falmouth. So thanks to the EDIC, thanks to Doug Dawson, and my apologies, Doug, that it took us so long to get you back to Falmouth. We're glad you're here, and we're looking forward to your recap, your reprise, and your summary of your work. But before we hear from Doug, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dan Gessen, who will introduce Doug. Dan is FalmouthNet's youngest board member, and he's our webmaster, and he's going to give us sort of a brief overview of the FalmouthNet concept, where we've been and where we hope to go. So over to you, Dan. Take it away.
Thank you, David. Good evening, everybody. First off, like everyone else here tonight, I want to thank the Falmouth Public Library for hosting this event. I want to also thank everybody here who came out tonight, because really having the town be informed about what's going on with fiber is going to be one of the main steps in bringing fiber optic internet to Falmouth. And also I want to thank Doug Dawson for taking the time to tell us about the important steps he's facilitated so far in the pursuit of our goal. My name is Dan Gessen. I'm currently a junior up at UMass Amherst, and I graduated Falmouth High School in 2018. I'm here today to introduce FalmouthNet, what we're doing, and why the work Mr. Dawson has done so far is so integral to this journey. Without a doubt, we all know that internet connectivity is extremely vital to pretty much everything we do on a daily basis. It's a part of our daily lives, and any successful economy and community, big or small, hoping to succeed in the modern world is going to have to be built around a strong and enduring broadband infrastructure. But when it comes to this vital infrastructure, it's no secret that Falmouth is behind the times. Our current system is actually 20 years behind. We experience more internet outages and slowdowns than most other communities, while paying more than most other communities. And the solution to this is fiber optic broadband. Fiber optic transmission is a more reliable technology, and it's 5 to 10 times faster. When we need to do Zoom calls like this one, video sharing, and remote work, we need the speed and reliability of fiber optics. As David said, in the spring of 2019, a group of concerned citizens came together to discuss how to make Falmouth's broadband technology better. This group is now FalmouthNet. In June of 2019, we had our first public meeting at this very library. And then that same month, fueled by the support from that meeting, the Falmouth EDIC granted the funds for a feasibility study. Doug Dawson began that study in December, and despite the COVID pandemic, Mr. Dawson completed his comprehensive study last November. You'll hear a lot from Mr. Dawson in a moment, but the top line finding was that a world-class fiber optic network was absolutely feasible in Falmouth. The report even found that 97% of Falmouth residents would support such a network if it competed with the current providers. This was one of the highest percentages that Mr. Dawson had ever seen in the community. The report also found that it would take 18 months to build the network for a price tag of $55 million. Obviously, that's a lot of money. So where's it coming from? Well, there's a lot of possible options. Many of them have been tried and tested in towns across the country. Most of these options can be laid out on a spectrum from being publicly funded to a completely privately funded endeavor. The more funding that is produced publicly, the higher the level of community control. Benefits of community control include oversight, as well as the fact that the community can decide the rates and accessibility of the network, such as, for instance, guaranteeing free internet to the some odd 40% of Falmouth Public School students currently on the free lunch program. And it goes without saying that the revenue collected by the network would financially benefit the town for decades to come. The private option comes with the obvious benefit of not requiring the town to put up its own money, and most likely will be a faster process, as it would require less of the legwork needed to gain enough consensus for public funding. Of course, it would come with some degree of sacrifice of community oversight and community control. In the end, the most likely path forward will be a middle ground public-private partnership, whereas the town and the state would be involved enough to help make this a reality, and thereby we would get a say in how the network turns out, all the while we would be able to benefit from the expertise and financial support of the private sector in bringing fiber to Falmouth. Regardless of how it gets built, however, it is absolutely vital that we bring fiber to Falmouth. Fiber would bring Falmouth into the modern economy, and it would guarantee that we'd be making us a competitive economy when it comes to being a sustainable community for young people, working people, and anybody with an internet connection. FalmouthNet is working hard to make this a reality, having conversations with our state and federal legislative delegations, as well as working with our town government, all while speaking with many companies that would be interested in investing their knowledge and their capital in our town. And we're doing this all in order to facilitate the best possible partnership for the benefit of Falmouth and our community. On that note, FalmouthNet is hoping to create a concrete picture of what that kind of partnership would look like in the next few weeks. But for tonight, and what we need from everybody here tonight, is to continue to stay informed. That's the most important thing we can be doing. One of the things that the study underscored as one of the main benefits of a fiber optic network in Falmouth and building it here is the community enthusiasm for it. And we can't let that momentum die down if we want to see it happen. So when you go home today, tell your friends about us, tell your neighbors about us, find us online, and spread the word about it. If you're a part of a community organization that you think would be interested in hearing from us, let me know. But on that note, let me turn it over to Mr. Dawson so he can get into the specifics of how we're going to bring this network to our town.
Thank you, Dan. I have to tell you, David, I don't think that I've ever had one of my studies called beautiful before. So, so well, that's a first. Yeah.
It's from the heart, truly from the heart, Doug.
Very good.
Really, to my mind, technology well explained is a thing of beauty.
Well, that's one thing I did. I wrote a long report and I wrote it in plain English. That's one of the things that I really tried to do for you guys. So let me just jump in here and tell you what we found and what the conclusions were. So one of the most interesting parts of the whole study was we had citizens in town do speed tests, and you never know what you're going to find. And what we found was really proof of what everyone had been saying in town. So what we found was the Comcast network is a lot slower than what they tell you it is. And so a year ago, they were telling you that everyone had 150 megabit downloads. And what we found was, 43% of people had speeds under 100 megabits, 23% of people had speeds under 50 megabits. And they were telling you if you called them up that what they were selling you was 150. Now, what we normally see is maybe 5% of people in a town have not very good speeds. And usually that's the home's fault. There will be a bad Wi-Fi router or whatever. But when you start seeing a fourth of all the homes have really miserable speeds, there's big problems in this network. And so, this finally presented the proof to you that the network was not as good as it wanted to be. We also did a survey, which I'll talk about in a minute, but that survey really demonstrated people complain mostly that the network is very inconsistent. It changes from hour to hour, minute to minute, day to day. And so again, that's very big evidence that there's a problem. The Verizon network the Verizon product in town is just miserable. Almost all the speeds were under 10 megabits a second download. I mean, some of the other big telephone companies upgraded their DSL to faster speeds over the last decade or so, and Verizon never really moved you guys past the first generation equipment. So that, that's really pretty bad stuff. During the pandemic, what we really found was the problem were upload speeds, though. So, for years and years, we talked about download speeds. Upload speeds on Verizon are all under 1 megabit. And if any of you are on Verizon trying to show your face on here, it's probably not working all that well. That's just a terrible speed to try to do things like this webcast. But Comcast was also not very good on uploads. 78% of people had upload speeds under 15 megabits per second. Over half, 55% were under 10 megabits per second, and 14% were under 5. Again, what Comcast tells the FCC is that everybody in town has 25 megabits. We found that only 15% had 25 megabits. And so that was really the problem, and it continues to be the problem during the pandemic. With those slow speeds, you can't work from home, you can't school from home, particularly if more than one person is trying to work at the same time. And we really dug into the study right when the pandemic hit, and I have to say this is the slowest study we ever delivered. But because of the pandemic, I mean, I was working with Mike at EDIC, and of course they had to run off and help with the pandemic. So, so we sort of got put on hold for a while. But these findings were they were quite surprising, because we've studied other Comcast networks around the country where some networks people get more than the advertised speeds. Your story is getting even worse, because a couple months ago, Comcast just arbitrarily now tells you have 200 megabits per second. That's the new standard speed. I haven't asked any of you, but I bet your speeds didn't get any faster. So you're just now that much more below what they're telling you. But you now have a 200 megabit network, in case you didn't know that. So that's their new national standard. The usage, and as bad as that usage is, remember now, we did that study from the beginning to the end of the pandemic. Back in the beginning of 2018, the average house used 200 megabits of broadband a month, 200 gigabits of broadband a month. That's upload and download combined. By the end of the pandemic, or the beginning of the pandemic, that had jumped to 400 gigabits. And at the end of last year, the most recent, it was an average of 482 gigabits that each household was using in 1 month. That's a 124% increase in 3 years. I mean, we're using so much more internet. So to the extent that the network was having problems in 2018, now with more than double the traffic on it, it's just really struggling. And I think where you're really going to see this is this summer, when everyone shows up. I mean, every summer is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And so if you think it was bad 2 summers ago, just hang on to your hat. So, yeah, one thing that was already actually mentioned by Linda and talking about, and also by David, we certainly found there was an affordability gap in town. 9% of residents don't have any internet at their house. Linda told us during the study that an awful lot of people come to the library and that's their only source of internet. And as Dan said, there's a lot of students that are on home lunches, and a lot of those don't have any internet or computer in their house. You guys took care of that during the pandemic pretty well. You got hotspots to people and you got Chromebooks to students, but we still have the long-term permanent issue to fix. Our study didn't really look at a low-income product. That just wasn't asked at the time, but I can already tell you from other studies I've worked on, as long as we can make this work for the regular citizens, you can then afford to layer on the low income. So that'll absolutely be something that'll work here. My report doesn't say that, but I will tell you, because the study works, that will work as well. So that sort of add that to my study as a late finding, if you want to think of it that way. My big conclusion of all that was the slow broadband in Falmouth really puts you at a competitive advantage. We talked to a lot of businesses in town during the pandemic, and every single one of them said, the only ones who were at all happy with their internet were on Arts network on Open Cape, but everyone who used Comcast or everyone used Verizon, they said it was adequate, it was spotty, it was inconsistent, and they felt they were paying too much and they weren't getting what they paid for it. And so businesses were not happy, but they really became unhappy during the pandemic when their employees could not work well at home. And that became a real major problem. I mean, some of the labs and stuff in town had as much as 25% of their employees really struggling to work from home. And you know, that's just a terrible situation that they ran into. So businesses, you know, that, you know, early when Dan talked about the benefits, you know, probably the biggest benefit before all others is how much the business community will benefit by a new network. So, you know, that's just something that's, you know, there too. And of course, that's why EDIC sponsored this study. They were really hearing from the business community that they could do better. And just as we were doing this study, you know, you got Open Cape put some fiber downtown. You know, those stores were so bad off that they couldn't even run credit cards. I mean, that is bad broadband. So, you know, things are starting to get better there. We also did a survey, and that's actually something that I reported on, I think, live at that. No, I guess that was after that meeting that I came up there live on. And as the slide Dan showed, there's massive support in the town for the concept of it coming to town. Probably the most important aspect of that survey was we interpret it to say that at least 61% of people in town will buy service from a network. For a town your size, that's an extraordinarily high number. We normally see that in the 40s. And so that's going to be really important in a minute when I talk about the money. So if that many people really buy it, this thing can be very successful. So we also talked to realtors and stuff, and they told us that 80% of all rental people now ask about broadband. And so, you know, they don't have the greatest story to tell them. They would have a great story to tell them that you have fiber. And you got to remember that a lot of your tourists are coming from Boston and New York and places where they're on Verizon Fios fiber. And so they get to town and really find it to be inadequate. So I'm sure they're quite surprised. If you have good fiber at your house, you just assume the rest of the world has a good fiber. That's something we've always learned. But you know, they find out, oh, geez, my broadband here is not nearly as good as it is at home. So Dan already quoted the big number, which was $54 million. That's how much it would cost to build a network with a 50% penetration. That goes up a little bit if you got more customers, because you have to hook up more houses. So that might go up another couple $1 million to get to 60%, another couple million to get to 70%. But that's certainly the range. And we've done something like 400 of these studies. We're pretty confident these are solid numbers. I know I've been following emails from David, and one of your next steps that they're thinking about doing is to do more engineering to really pin that number down, which is one of my recommendations. We did very high level engineering in the feasibility study, and before you go spend 50 million bucks, we always recommend you do it a little more detailed. And so, you know, that'll be a next step. But you know, that is a big number to swallow, but it's not it's not a number that can't be found. So we see other communities do it. You know, the big conclusion out of all that, you know, I probably ran 30 or 40 financial models and kicked the tires real hard on all the different things that could change in your business if you ran it. We looked at the city as an ISP. We looked at a private company as the ISP. We looked at all sorts of public-private partnerships, and they all worked. The only thing that didn't really work is something called open access, where the town builds it and then just invites multiple ISPs. I couldn't find a way to make the math work on that one, but the scale, the chart that Dan showed you going from public to private, all of those sort of regular scenarios, they all worked and they all made money. And the good news is that what is called the break-even penetration, the number of customers you have to get to make this thing work, were quite a bit lower than what people said they would buy. I calculated a range of break-evens between 42% of households in town and 48%. And that range is going to depend on how you finance it. You know, the most expensive kind of financing would be municipal revenue bonds. So if you did it that way, it's a 48% break even. If you go some of the cheaper routes of financing, it would be as low as 42. Both of those are a lot lower than the 61% that the survey predicted that you would get. And And always keep in mind that 62% of people in the survey said that, and that number probably goes up as you do education here and get more people to understand what you're doing. So I would expect that the town will be even more behind it as you go on here and keep having these kind of meetings. And so, nothing is ever foolproof, but that is a business plan that feels somewhat safe. It doesn't feel high risk. I mean, I do studies for some towns that the break even is 45%, and their survey predicts 47% penetration rate. That's a risky venture. It's like, well, maybe you make it, maybe you don't make it. But here, I think there's enough public interest that it probably makes it. The other good news is all of my approaches said, can we make it with just the people who live here? Forget the summer tourists, and they only make the study better. I think an awful lot of your landlords obviously will put in broadband, but it makes it just upon the full-time residences. And the other good news there is, from what I understand, since the time we did the study, you have more full-time residences now. So I guess people are moving there, which is only going to help this study because those folks will want broadband as well. So, that's a very good finding in terms of risk. And that's how I always judge these things, is how risky. So it doesn't feel tremendously risky. Now, with that said, I think the very last slide that Dan put up there was talking about raising the money. And that's the hard part. I mean, you're getting ready to undertake the hardest part of the whole process, is finding the money. That's a lot of money to find. No matter how many people you talk to, no one has ever easily financed a fiber system. That anytime you start talking about anything bigger than $1 million, it starts getting harder. When you start talking above 50 million, it gets to be a heck of a lot of work to raise the money. But you have a good story to tell to do that with, and if you're persistent, I think that you will find that. So, a public-private partnership, which is the middle of the three options that Dan showed on his chart, can work. And there's so many different ways to do that. So I know you've already, David said you were discussing it with Open Cape, and you will probably discuss that with others. That's just an interesting model in that the city puts up some money, but you also bring in professional management, and that's probably the fastest way to get this thing done if you find the right partner and the right partnership. So, that's a really interesting path to pursue. One of the things, and you're starting to do those, you have to pin down what I call the key variables. Because there's certain things that really affect the performance of the business. One of them is to make sure that we really pin down the 54 million, and that's something you're looking at. The other really key variables, the interest rates are a big one, and the good news is, since the time I've done the study, interest rates have gotten better. So, this is just an amazing year. If you could find a way to borrow the money this year, interest rates are they're down. The chart I looked at showed these at 1960 rates. There's not too many of us here who were thinking about borrowing money in 1960. A few of us. So that's a big variable. And obviously, we want to get this thing done before someday the interest rates go back up. Another big variable is prices. And my study did a little bit of work on prices. That's something that I would recommend you really work out early, because the prices I use in the study started at $60 for fast internet. There's a really big change if we drop that to 50. So as much as you want to have cheap internet, that makes a real difference on making this thing work. It doesn't. I'm not telling you can't do that, but that's really got to be studied hard before you lower the prices too much. So that's probably the key variable in the whole thing. The other one is penetration rates. I think that before you go to launch this business, you will do a lot more of, not so much of a survey, but you'll probably start a sign-up list and actually get people to start signing up, so that by the time you actually get going, it would be ideal to already have 30 or 40% of the households in town signed up, and that'll take away your risk of not making it. So, that's probably one of the most important things you can do. It was a really interesting study because Falmouth isn't a coherent community from a perspective of someone building a network. You're 5 or 6 different towns. Every one of them looks different in terms of the cost to build. I mean, some of the places are hilly and you know, have a lot of trees, and we had to bury fiber, and other places have sandy soil, and you could practically bury fiber with a teaspoon, you know, so every one of your neighborhoods had very drastically different cost characteristics. And the people who lived there and the responses to the survey were quite different by community. We actually did the survey by voting district. So we got to see how the different parts of towns answer the questions. And that certainly is an interesting challenge to have a town that's not uniform throughout. So, so that, you know, that's something else. Now the study again is, I don't know, 200 pages long, and there's just a ton of other things we talked about there. I'm not going to summarize those tonight, but if someone wants to ask questions about them, but Mike and EDIC made me a list of 6 or 8 topics they wanted to hear about, like, you know, what does this do to Falmouth community television, and, you know, is there ways to make this a regional business, and just all these other kind of questions that the study investigates and talks about. So, so in a nutshell, that's really the short list of what I found, and I'd be glad to answer questions for folks.
Thank you very much, Doug. We've actually been fielding some of the easier questions on the chat, but first, I think Doug deserves a round of virtual applause for such an really he's taken this so far with really very diligent observations and with the benefit of all of his experience. So thanks so much, Doug. Really.
You're all welcome.
So Carrie Strom asked, and I'm just going to read this because I'm a little confused. Carrie, are you here? I don't see her. Okay, there you are. All right. So let me read what you wrote. Doug, who negotiates agreements between Open Cape and businesses on Cape using fiber now? In other countries, fiber optic companies are forced to provide everyone, not just the cities and big businesses, or else they don't get their license. There's a few questions in there, but maybe you could speak to Carrie's concern.
Well, I really don't have the slightest idea how Open Cape negotiates with their customers. I assume that they meet them one-on-one and work out a deal for them. So, I mean, Open Cape is a private nonprofit provider that we understand, and so they are not obligated to serve everybody. They're, you know, they want to serve a lot of folks, but they, you know, they have their own rules, internal rules, where they want to only do things that pay the bills. So. And so they, you know, they really are they're closer. There's 2 kinds of carriers. There's carriers who serve residences and everybody. They're much more of like what I call a wholesale provider, selling to larger businesses and stuff. And that's simply who they've elected to be. I mean, probably there's more ISPs in the country that look like them than there are ISPs who serve neighborhoods. The Open Cape is a very typical ISP who serves businesses. I mean, that's just
right. But who gives them the license to come in here and run cable? That's the question.
Well, they, you know, there is a public right of way on every street, and I'm sure that they had to come to the town and follow a bunch of rules in order to get on the poles, and then they have to go to the people that own the poles and make contracts with them in order to get on those. So the poles are available to anybody. Any carrier can come and get on them. So, you know, you could have 20 ISPs in town if they each wanted to come and do that. So,
and so Falmouth isn't involved in improving anything. It's all done privately.
No, I'm sure that Falmouth, you know, gave them the permission to come to town, but only in a really minor way. I mean, it's, you know, really what they're following are state and national rules that allow anybody to come and be an ISP. So,
we had Carrie, Art Gaylord is on the board of FalmouthNet, and also he's a co-founder of Open Cape. So maybe Art can explain sort of explain the basics of Open Cape and the prospects for Open Cape and FalmouthNet to collaborate. Art Gaylord.
Sure. Basically, Open Cape didn't need to get permission from any of the towns, and it operates in 5 different counties, 2 different states at this point, Massachusetts and Rhode Island. What we did have to do is become what's called a CLEC, which is a registration with the state to be a communications provider. And then we had to go and license our presence on all the telephone poles that we're on, which is like about 20,000 at this point, with both Verizon and Eversource, and in some cases, National Grid, who are the pole owners. The only time we actually, I think, needed permission from the town of Falmouth was when we used a few poles that were owned by the town, and also when we entered town-owned buildings. The other thing is this isn't really a franchising type situation. It's so you don't have to do that. Like, you know, if like when Comcast comes to town and offers television services, which are licensed and franchised, they have to agree to provide it to all of the town, or at least some high percentage of the town. When you're selling internet services and so forth, that's not a requirement.
Okay, so even though they're using the roads, because when I called a salesman at Open Cape, his name was Ed, and I was informed that, like, I live near the hospital in Falmouth, and he said it was in conduit, like it was already here, but it's only turned on for the businesses. And I'm like, well, I know I can get lots of neighborhoods, you know, and I see Tom Duncan on the phone. I've mentioned this to neighbors and trying to get buy-in, and he's like, oh, but it would be like 10,000 a house to run it up to everybody's house. And I was like, what?
Yeah, well,
so it's already in conduit, it's in my neighborhood, but I can't have it.
Well, that's because what Open Cape offers now, with a few exceptions, is a different type of service than would be offered to small businesses and to residences. They're offering a service which is basically a dedicated service. It's more expensive with guaranteed bandwidth. It's more expensive to install and operate. The type of network or type of electronics that would be used in a residential setting is, I don't want to get too technical here, but it's a fast but somewhat locally shared bandwidth, which is much lower cost to deploy and maintain. And Open Cape is doing that in a couple of places experimentally now, and that's what the Falmouth Main Street project is based upon. But the whole staffing, billing, operations, and so forth for retail mass marketing type services is a different business than Open Cape is currently in. And I think just one more thing is that because of the town has expressed a number of times, you know, various people through the select board and the FalmouthNet people and others that we've talked to, you know, about how could Open Cape get involved in this. And that's something that, you know, Open Cape is going to take seriously and look at. We've also been asked the same types of questions by several other towns around the Cape.
So the bottom line is that Open Cape is wholesale and FalmouthNet proposes to be retail. Open Cape has 42 miles of fiber in Falmouth, and Falmouth has 460 miles of road that we would need to cable up with fiber optics. And so to get an individual neighborhood on Open Cape would not be correct economy of scale. We in FalmouthNet propose to build the whole thing to serve every home and business that wants it at once. That's really, and we're partnering with Open Cape. Art's on both boards. we talk to each other all the time. So it's not an either or situation. It's likely to wind up being some kind of and both situation. So let's see if there are other questions for Doug Dawson.
Somebody, just to continue on the same thing, because somebody just asked, could a neighborhood pay to connect to Open Cape? And the answer is, if there were a large enough neighborhood, Open Cape would consider it. I mean, we have talked with other neighborhoods or, private development projects and so forth about providing services. But we can't really do it if it's a dozen houses. But if there's, if it's in the hundreds of houses and so forth, yes, that would be something to be considered. But at this point, within Falmouth at least, the best option is probably just try to help us get the network be built for everybody in town.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And when we build it for everybody, we fully intend to use our economies of scale to serve everybody, so that if there are people who are in economically disadvantaged situations, we in Falmouth can have the option of giving them some kind of price break or temporarily free service or something like that. But we have that level. We propose to have that level of control. Everybody on our board believes that that's a value that we should pursue. Whether it actually becomes practical, feasible, is another story. But let's have questions for Doug, please. Anybody else for Doug?
I don't know if it's for Doug or just in general for you or Dan. I think that starting in 2022 isn't soon enough. We need to start now, and waiting another half year it will already be at the point where it's not going to even meet its own ROI, and it will become obsolete before it can be installed.
Well, I could address that.
Please.
Fiber is a 100-year investment, so fiber is not going to become obsolete. In fact, I want to take exception to Dan's chart, because since we did that study last year, in the last month, I have finally seen 10 gigabit fiber is actually as cheap as 1 gigabit fiber. So when you build that, you're actually going to build 10 gigabits for every house. At least that capability, because that's now the new standard. And there's no reason that you would put in the technology that we studied was called GPON. There's a technology called XGS-PON that is now just as cheap as that was in the study. So that network that's a 100-year network. I mean, the electronics will have to be upgraded a few times, but the fiber will be around, for your grandkids and maybe their kids. So, this is a really long-term investment you're talking about. This is sewer, streets, and roads. So.
Yeah, but actually it doesn't, because 5G and LEO satellite services of Starlink and OneWeb will obsolete any kind of hardware infrastructure.
No, sir, they will not. Neither one of those will. You're not going to have 5G in town that's anywhere near as fast as what Comcast has today. And Starlink is not going to sell one customer in Falmouth. They are not going to sell in urban areas. So, and there's a lot of discussion that, the top speed on Starlink, once it's loaded, might be 50 megabits per second. That's way slower than what Comcast is. That's a really good rural solution. That is not going to come and sweep the town. It'll never happen.
Plus, Jacob, we propose to serve everybody with uniformly high-speed service, and 5G is only going to serve the centers of towns and maybe some villages and maybe the major roads. But 5G is not a substitute for community fiber optic network everywhere.
Well, and also personally, I think
neither is satellite. Sorry.
Right. But also, I mean, personally, 5G is toxic and shouldn't be in rural areas at all. But still, I would like to see this happening as soon as possible. And so I would want to really get it in place now. I want it this summer, not 2 summers from now.
We applaud your impatience. Thank you.
My entire extended family, right? My nieces and nephews are all attending school on Zoom, and that is their way of education. And if they don't have reliable internet, they're screwed.
You're right about that.
Yeah, I think we would all like to have it right away. The problem is, unless somebody hands over a big bucket of money right away, it's going to be hard to do. And even then, you know, the construction time, as Doug mentioned, is probably on the order of 18 months. You might be able to speed it up a little bit, but I would love to have it by this summer, but no way. And even next summer is probably a real stretch. But you can be assured that the people in FalmouthNet, you know, we all want to have it as fast as we can. And we're doing everything we can to speed things up. And, you know, part of the thing about how fast does it happen is going to be, you know, how much noise do all the people in town make to make it happen?
Right. So just specifically within my 1 block radius area, I know of 5 families that will immediately jump on the bandwagon. And it's a very small block radius area.
Could I jump in?
Ladies and gentlemen, Courtney Bird is the president of FalmouthNet, and he's asked for permission to speak, and I think we should let him.
First of all, Jacob, I welcome you as my newest friend. If I were able to, I would like to see this thing being done tomorrow. You know, it's extremely important. And, but there's a lot of moving parts that have to be brought into account. We have to do the engineering study that we discussed, and that's going to cost for $200,000, and we got to get that done. And that's important, and that takes time. Then we have to come up with an operating model. What is the nature of the town's participation? What other bodies are going to be involved? What sort of agreements are going to be worked out? That takes time. The question of funding has to come into play. But as Art pointed out, and as David pointed out, it's extraordinarily important for the success of this thing that our town fathers know that it's an important priority to the citizens of Falmouth. Because there are, in fact, a lot of priorities that this town currently is facing. Matters of coastal resiliency, matters of sewering. All these different things are demands on the town's resources, and therefore, and they're important priorities as well. But, you know, if the citizens of Falmouth want this, they need to make their will known. That's my editorial comment for tonight.
Thank you, Courtney. Anybody else have anything for Doug or the rest of us? We need your questions, and more importantly, we need your support. We need your understanding. Okay, well, we've practically been going, oh, hang on. Someone, Gary Brightboard has a question. Gary, shoot.
Yes, this is outstanding. I just moved down to Falmouth after 17 years of being a tourist. And one of the questions I have, I know Comcast has pushed back, and I didn't see it anywhere in the study. I mean, it's a daunting task to raise 55 million, but in some municipalities, Comcast pushes back for competitive broadband, saying, hey, we've got licenses here, you can't do that. But that's usually if it's cable TV subscriptions. I was wondering, Doug, apologize, if you've seen that, if it's just a broadband, infrastructure offering. And then the second question I have, and I've seen it back and forth on here, the biggest issue to do this is, we're going to have to get community interest and sell people on why they want to do this. And I was really surprised by the survey at the number of people who are still using basic cable subscription. And the easiest way to get them over is going to be, listen, I can provide you the same service you get today, but it's cheaper or it's faster or something else to make it an easy switch. So the first is there any pushback from Comcast on just basic broadband infrastructure? And then secondly, that could be a big another question to ask. Is it feasible to also get some sort of content coverage over this network as well from a sales perspective?
Doug.
Well, first off, not first off, but Comcast pretty much reacts universally the same way nowadays. If you started building this network, they're going to come in and offer everyone in town a really cheap rate to sign up for a 2 or 3 year contract. And that's actually not that bad because you can't hook everybody in the first year or two anyhow. It takes a while to hook everybody up. And so it actually, even if you build this thing right away, it probably takes 4 years to get everybody hooked up on it. And so, that's really all they do. They don't really anymore try to stop you in any way. It doesn't really matter whether you offer cable or not. They will compete back, but what they really aren't going to do is come and spend a lot of money to make their network better.
Right.
And so, to answer your second question, this is a really easy sell because you can come into people and go, we have real speeds, 100 megabits on Comcast and 100 megabits on fiber are two drastically different products. Even though they both say they're 100 megabits, one of them feels 8 times faster than the other one. So you're not going to have a problem once even a few people get hooked up. They're going to hear about the speeds, and word of mouth is the best salesperson. So we don't really see with the amount of demand we saw in the survey, you're not going to have a problem getting people excited about the products. What happened in the survey and all surveys is there's a group of people that go, and it's Jacob's one, I want it tomorrow. And there's some people that go, I might want it. And they're the ones that'll have to be sold and convinced, but they usually come over. What we see in other municipal networks, one of my clients is in Oregon and has had a municipal network now for 12 years. And every year they get more people, and they are now up to 84% of the people in town, which is basically, but they didn't start that well. They started in 30% or something, but year after year after year, people go, why am I still sticking on this Comcast network? So eventually you get almost everybody, but that's a long time away. So, but the answer is this is not a hard sell. You'll be surprised. Now the last question you asked, I'm not recommending that anyone do their own content nowadays other than maybe local content. You very well may have, because you have Falmouth TV, you might put them on here, but you can't really make money putting cable TV on your network. It's a money loser. So, people can get everything they want on the internet anyhow. So, that's something that we don't recommend anymore. The local content's awesome. So we would like you to see local content on your network. In fact, one of my clients sort of broke the mold on local content 20 years ago. They put the local court on TV, which means divorces and DUIs and the thing had the highest rating of anything in the whole county. Everybody watched it. So local content, but high school sports and all that stuff are awesome content to put on. So you should definitely do all that stuff. So.
Doug, we have a question from, I'm not sure what the fellow's name is, but his handle here is House of Pete's. Could you introduce yourself, please? I don't know you.
I'm taking myself off mute. My name is Theodore Pease. I've been following your effort very, very closely. I actually live in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, and we're in a very similar situation to Falmouth, Massachusetts. We're served by an incumbent company, Cox Communication, and we have frequent outages and degraded service. So very familiar with Open Cape and how they can be a partner for your efforts. And we're looking at a last mile project here in Portsmouth as well. So I think there's an opportunity for synergy. And my questions are more directed towards Doug. And I read your feasibility study, page to page, 260 pages of it. And my question were, besides make ready, what is the greatest variable in terms of cost, and how do we mitigate those variables? Because we just don't want to propose a project and then have cost overruns.
Well, and that's why we recommend a little more detailed engineering. The fact is, we can understand those costs before you get started. You know, it's very unusual today, if you do your homework, to have cost overruns. The other issue is to get yourself a really good quality engineer and construction firm, because there are some construction companies in the world who make all their money by what's called change orders. You know, what you want to get is somebody who will guarantee their prices when they go to build it. That's the only other way and that's the same reason almost a lot of government projects of all kinds go over budget, is because of change orders. So that, you know, it's really not that hard to do your homework. You know, in Falmouth, it's not hard to understand the poles because you can see them all. And we understand all the buried areas because those are actually been buried relatively recently. So there's really not a lot of surprises in Falmouth. It doesn't mean that there's not some surprises in your town that you'd have to figure out. But once you figure those out, you really shouldn't be seeing cost overruns. It's a matter of just doing the good engineering. So.
Of course. And my follow-up question, Doug, if you didn't mind, in the feasibility study, I couldn't figure out, are you intending for all the locations for your telecom huts to be an in-kind location where you don't have to pay for a lease or purchase land or property? Or are you assuming that you're going to have to pay for rights of way? Because obviously that is one great way to reduce the cost of the overall project.
It depends on who the owner of the network is. If it's a community at all based network, they will probably not pay anything for any of those. There's going to be government owned lands. There's public right of way to put them in. And at the most, what you normally might do is say, look, I want to put this hut in your yard. I'll give you internet free for a year for doing that. Yeah, I mean, people don't pay for the, now if Comcast might have to pay because people go, well, I don't really like you, but a community-based network almost never pays for those things. And I would not expect you to do that. People in town are like, heck yeah, put it, you know, if my neighborhood gets fast broad, Jacob is going to take one in his yard. I guarantee it. So.
Mr. Peace, what's your first name again?
Ed.
Ed, contact us offline, please. We are happy to help other municipal broadband efforts and hook you up with the right level of expertise. We've been talking to Waukegan, Illinois, and I've got a friend in Lincolnville, Maine, who's trying to do this, and we're happy to help other efforts like that. If you want to get something going, right, you know, use our contact links on the FalmouthNet webpage, and we'll get back to you and help if at all possible.
Sounds like a plan.
Anybody else from Falmouth have questions for Doug or anybody else in FalmouthNet?
David, there's a question that just was on the chat.
Yes. Bob Cronin. Bob, would you like to say your question? Bob Cronin?
Yes, I'm here. I'm about to run. I just was wondering if any communities partially fund these kind of projects with a real estate transfer tax. Is that an opportunity that we might be able to avail ourselves to? Does that happen in any other states?
It has in a handful of projects, normally in smaller towns. Actually, the closest one to you is in Leverett, Mass. Did it that way years ago, and so that's a small town that's basically UMass professors, and they just said, let's just raise our property taxes and pay for this darn thing and build it. And so there are probably 15 or 20 towns that have financed it that way. A lot of what will really end up happening is you don't normally find all the money in any one place. So you might do a little of this and a little of that and a little of this. That way, none of those things are too painful. I'm working with a client in Michigan who did the math, and their math said the property tax increase would be $25 a year for every home to pay for the fiber, but they could end up cutting the fiber prices by $30 a year by using the tax revenue, and they would have like $30 gigabit. So, you know, that's a really interesting way to do it because it avoids a lot of those overheads that come with bond financing. So it's definitely one of the things that should be on your table. So
Art actually has been crunching some numbers for Falmouth that show that what the tax impact would be. Art?
Yeah, and these are approximate numbers, so don't hold me to them. But if it were a $55 million project with financing, it would come out to be about 72 or 73 million dollars. And if all of that were done by a general obligation bond issue from the town, the tax impact on an average home of $500,000, which I think is the median price, at least it was, would be about $130 a year. And that would, nominally be for 20 years, except we would expect that the network would start, covering all of its costs, including any bond and financing costs, after 5 or 6 years. So it would really be only an impact on the citizens for, the first few years. Again, those numbers are, those were done by my calculations based on town budgets and town tax rates and so forth. They haven't been vetted by any of the financial officers, but I've done these types of calculations before, and I'm pretty sure I'm close. And one thing to point out is that for people currently subscribing to Comcast, they would save well over $130 a year just by switching to what the Falmouth network. That they'd probably save that in about 3 months or so. So you're not talking about a huge increase. And if the town were to decide to fund maybe not all of it, but a third of it or something, then the cost would be correspondingly less.
Doug, does that sound realistic?
it does. It does. The math, you have enough citizens there, the math is good. Raising money is still hard. You have to, getting anyone to agree to raise a tax is a challenge. You all know this, but the math is very compelling. So, yeah.
But what we find is that there are private companies that want to come in and bring their own money and build the network for us and then run the network and send out bills and pay themselves back. And for some reason, they seem to think that that's a good business. And if they think it's a good business, well, there's probably some business reality behind that.
Right.
Other questions? Okay, I think maybe this is as good a time to end as Courtney. Do you have a question or
Just a quick add-on comment, and it reinforces what Dan said earlier in his slide presentation. Certainly the quickest way to do this might be to find a private company to come in. But one of the most important objectives of FalmouthNet, and it's already been alluded to by several other people, is that we want to see a community network. We want to see a network that serves all of the people, regardless of their income. We want to make sure that things like Falmouth Community Television are properly funded. We want to make sure that educational opportunities are maximized. We want to make sure that, for example, telemedicine becomes a reality. Now, some of those goals are not necessarily in sync with what a private company is looking for when they're maximizing profits. And so it's extremely important, in our view, that the town that the town has some skin in the game, that the town participates in any partnership. Because what's important is that those goals be assured for the benefit of the community. And that partnership is essential, but it's essential for the town to be in a position to step up. That's our view. And I'm sure there are people who may disagree, but that's our view. And I think it's really important for the future of this thing.
Okay. Doug, Bob Cronin wanted to know specifically about a real estate transfer tax, and he asked again on the chat, and so he's probably got some reason to ask. Could you address the issue specifically a real estate transfer tax?
I don't know what a Massachusetts real estate transfer tax is, so I really can't answer that.
Okay.
That sounds pretty specific.
It is very specific, and we'll have to defer that. Bob, if you want to get back to us with the contact page on our website, we will attempt to run that one down for you. Thank you for the question. Anybody else have a burner? We've all been at this for over an hour, and your attention has been greatly appreciated, everybody. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you all for having me here this evening. So
before we go, let me introduce Sam Patterson, who's on the select board, who's here. Sam, wave. Mike DiGiano, who's the executive director of the EDIC, which funded the study. Thanks so much.
Nancy Taylor is a select board member. I saw her on the among the participants earlier.
Yes, indeed. Steve Tom is very involved. He's currently the customer service rep for Open Cape, and he's riding herd on the Falmouth business experiment. Hello, Steve. Thanks for coming. Mary Lois Snowman, who's just represented in text down below, but has been answering a lot of questions in the chat very well, I should say. Hi, Mary Lois. There's your picture. She's our vice president. So thanks very much for your great work, Mary Lois. And I don't know who else I'm missing, but I see a lot of friends here and a bunch of people I don't know, but you've all come to learn more. And I think it's been a really successful session. So thanks again, Linda, for hosting us.
Glad to have you.
Okay.
This has been great.
And please sign up for our newsletter on FalmouthNet.org and participate on our website, which is Falmouth Community Network, and you'll see us around. Hopefully, we'll be hanging cable on poles or digging a trench in your neighborhood in the very near future.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Very good. Okay. Good night.
Right.
All right. See you out on the water.
Indeed.